It is time for the mic drop. On each show, by going deep on one topic affecting our community, and hopes we can all learn a little more. Now, if you happen to be near the J. Edgar Hoover building, FBI headquarters, located on Pennsylvania Avenue here in D.C. today, then you probably noticed the barricades that were set up around it over the weekend in response to an increasing number of threats made against the Bureau and its agents. Now, this is following the execution of a search warrant at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence. And as of now, there's no reporting on just how long these safety measures will be needed. But I wouldn't expect them to come down anytime soon. Just as I don't expect the threats of violence and online rhetoric to ratchet down anytime soon either. Now, unfortunately, for those of us who live and work in the district, barricades and fencing around federal buildings is not an uncommon sight. But this feels different. There's an edginess coming out of these threats and some of the events we've seen here and around the country in the last week that feels different. There was last week's attempted breach of an FBI field office in Cincinnati, Ohio last Thursday by an armed assailant who the Bureau was already interested in because of his possible extremist online behaviors. The lone wolf attack resulted in the gunman being killed by police after a 6-hour standoff on a rural road. There was a protest outside of an FBI field office in Phoenix, Arizona just this Saturday by armed Trump supporters. Thankfully, that ended peacefully. And of course, there was the Delaware man who, after crashing his car into a barricade near the Capitol early Sunday morning, got out, fired a gun into the air several times before turning it on himself. We don't know why he crashed his car and took his own life, but we do know that taken all together, this all feels very different. Nothing like the perfectly legal protests we saw after the overturning of Roe. When those were happening, certain legislators were calling for law enforcement to intercede on the behalf of Supreme Court justices. Well, where are those calls now that we're seeing armed protesters positioning themselves outside of government offices? Where were they a few years ago when we saw armed protesters inside of state government offices? Where are they when law enforcement are the target? I'm old enough to remember when that was reason enough to quash calls for racial equity. But now let me stop beating around the bush and get to the question that I think needs to be asked. Is Donald Trump, by his reaction to a legal search of his residence, to blame for what we're seeing? His supporters will tell you no. His family will tell you no. Members of the right-wing media will tell you no. His political party will tell you no. Now, I may not be able to tell you definitively yes, but I assure you I can't tell you no. From as far back as when he was originally running for office, the man has stoked an atmosphere of violence or walking right to the line of stoking it, as of some of his assorted followers. The difference now is that the vitriol is directed towards members of law enforcement simply doing their jobs, which may be why it feels different. We don't know how this is going to end because the story is still being written, but you can't unring a bell. So unfortunately, until that ending comes, we may just have to get used to feeling different.